You are not here by accident, but I want to begin today with something so simple that its simplicity is itself a kind of provocation. When was the last time you sat in complete silence? Not the silence of sleep, not the silence of distraction, the phone face down, the music low, the podcast paused. Genuine silence, the silence in which you could hear your own breathing, in which no external signal arrived to tell your nervous system what to attend to next, in which the only thing present was you and whatever you actually are when nothing is organizing you from the outside. If you have to think about the answer is probably too long ago. And I want to suggest to you that this is not a trivial fact about your habits. It is a diagnostic fact about the condition of your soul. James Hillman understood something that our entire culture of productivity and stimulation and continuous connection has organized itself to prevent you from understanding. He understood that the soul requires silence the way the body requires sleep, not as a luxury, not as a spiritual practice for people with the time and inclination for such things, as a biological and psychological necessity, without which certain essential processes of the inner life simply cannot occur. The modern world is not accidentally noisy. It is systematically, deliberately, profitably noisy. Because in silence, something happens that the economy of attention cannot monetize. In silence, the soul begins to speak. And what the soul says, slowly, quietly, in the register that only genuine stillness can produce, is almost never what the culture wants you to hear. It tells you what you actually value, what you are actually afraid of, what you have been avoiding, what is trying to grow in you that the noise has been preventing from growing, what you actually want underneath the wants that the culture has worked so hard to install. That is not good for advertising. It is very good for the soul. Let me tell you about something I observed over many years of clinical practice. The people who came to me in the most genuine distress, the people carrying the heaviest burdens, the deepest confusions, the most persistent and unresolvable suffering, almost universally shared one characteristic that had nothing to do with the content of their specific difficulties. They had no silence in their lives, not because they were lazy or undisciplined or had failed to understand the importance of self-care, but because silence, for most of them, was genuinely intolerable. Not uncomfortable, intolerable. The moment the external stimulation ceased, something arose that felt unbearable, a quality of inner weather that the noise had been keeping at bay, a nameless anxiety, a pressing sadness, a confrontation with something they could not identify but could not face, and so they kept the noise running. The television that was always on in the background, the phone that was checked compulsively at every pause, the music that filled every space between activities, the podcast that accompanied every commute, every walk, every moment that would otherwise have been empty, not empty, quiet. The distinction matters. Empty is nothing. Quiet is a quality of space in which something can be present that cannot be present in noise, and what they were preventing from being present, what the continuous stimulation was so effectively keeping at bay, was their own inner life, their own actual experience of being alive in this body, in this moment, with these specific contents of consciousness. The noise was not filling an empty space, it was silencing a speaking one. Here is what Hillman understood about silence that almost no one in the therapeutic tradition has been willing to say as directly. The soul speaks slowly, in a register that is incompatible with noise, in images that do not arrive on demand but emerge gradually in the particular quality of attention that only genuine stillness can sustain. The imaginal life, the life of dreams, of fantasy, of the specific images that arise unbidden and carry meaning the conscious mind has not yet reached, is entirely incompatible with continuous stimulation. It requires the conditions of stillness in the same way that certain plants require specific conditions of light and soil. Not because it is fragile, but because its mode of communication is quiet, and quiet cannot be heard through noise. What this means practically is that the person who maintains continuous noise in their inner and outer environment is not simply choosing a preference about stimulation levels. They are systematically preventing the one channel through which the deepest parts of their psyche can communicate with the surface consciousness that is living their life. They are living with a radio permanently running on the frequency that blocks the signal the soul is trying to transmit. And they wonder why they feel, despite the fullness of their lives, a persistent sense that something essential is absent, that they are present everywhere and nowhere, that they know themselves thoroughly from the outside and barely at all from the inside. The absence they feel is not the absence of more content. It is the absence of the signal that the noise has been blocking for so long they have forgotten it was ever there. Now let me speak about 20 minutes. 20 minutes of genuine silence every day. Not meditation in the formal sense. Though if you practice meditation, this is what meditation is aiming at. Not breath work, not guided visualization, not any form of structured practice that gives your attention something to do. 20 minutes in which you simply stop, in which you sit or lie or walk very slowly in a place with no other people, with no phone, no music, no podcast, no input of any kind from the external world, in which the only thing you attend to is whatever arises in the silence. This seems, to most people who have not tried it, either very simple or very unnecessary, and to most people who try it for the first time, genuinely intolerable. Because what arises in the first minutes of genuine silence is almost never pleasant. What arises first is the noise that was underneath the noise, the thoughts that the external stimulation was suppressing, the feelings that had been waiting behind the input, the specific quality of the inner weather that the continuous engagement with the outer world had been preventing from registering. This is not a failure of the practice. This is the practice beginning, because the thoughts and feelings that arise in the first minutes of silence are not the problem. They are the contents of your actual inner life that had nowhere to register while the stimulation was running. And allowing them to register, simply being present to them without immediately reaching for the phone, without immediately providing yourself with something else to attend to, is the beginning of the relationship with your own soul that the noise has been preventing. The first minutes are the hardest. They are always the hardest, because the habit of stimulation is powerful and the discomfort of its absence is real. And the mind, deprived of its usual input, will generate its own noise, the looping thoughts, the mental to-do list, the plans and replays and anxieties that the external stimulation had been drowning out. Let them run. Do not try to stop them. Simply be present to them as you are present to weather, observing without fighting, without following, without making them mean more than they are. And then, gradually, something shifts. The mental noise begins to settle. Not because you have suppressed it, but because you have given it space to run its course. And in the settling, in the specific quality of quiet that emerges when the surface agitation has been allowed to express itself and subside, something else begins. Images, feelings without clear objects. The specific quality of knowing that arrives not as a thought, but as a perception. The sense of something becoming visible that was always there, but required this quality of attention to see. This is the soul beginning to speak. And the soul, once it has been given the conditions it requires to speak, has a great deal to say. Let me be specific about what happens over time when this practice is maintained. Not the dramatic transformation, not the sudden insight that changes everything. The quiet, cumulative, irreversible deepening that 20 minutes of daily silence produces in a life. You begin to know what you actually think, not what you have been told to think, not what the culture's continuous stream of input has been suggesting you think, not the reactive opinions that form in response to stimulation. What you actually think, arising from the depth of your own experience and your own values and your own considered encounter with what you actually know. You begin to know what you actually feel, the genuine emotional texture of your experience beneath the managed surface that most of us present to the world and to ourselves, the specific quality of what is actually happening inside you rather than the interpretation of it you have been building from the outside. You begin to know what you actually want, not the wants that have been installed by the continuous advertising of everything the culture is selling, including its versions of the good life, the successful life, the psychologically healthy life. The genuine wants that arise from the specific shape of your soul that have been present all along but have required silence to become audible. And you begin to know, with increasing clarity and increasing calm, what you are afraid of, not the named fears. Those are often managed. The unnamed ones, the specific quality of the thing that the noise has been keeping at bay. Because until you can be in the presence of what you are afraid of, without immediately reaching for the thing that makes it smaller, you cannot be in full possession of your own life. Silence makes this possible, not because it eliminates the fear, because it makes the fear present in a context of sufficient stillness that you can actually look at it. And what you can look at, with genuine attention and genuine courage, begins to lose the absolute power it had when it was only a pressure in the background that the noise was keeping just manageable. There will be people in your life who do not understand why you protect this time, who will interpret 20 minutes of daily silence as self-indulgence, or as absence, or as something to be scheduled around rather than built into the structure of the day with the same seriousness you bring to eating and sleeping. Let them not understand, because the person who maintains their silence, who has built into the architecture of their daily life the 20 minutes that the soul requires to communicate with the surface consciousness that is living the life, carries a quality that is immediately perceptible and very difficult to describe, a quality of being genuinely present rather than perpetually distracted, of having a center that does not require continuous stimulation to remain coherent, of inhabiting their own life from the inside rather than managing it from a distance. That quality is not produced by content. It is not produced by insight or by psychological sophistication or by the accumulation of self-knowledge. It is produced by the simple, consistent, daily practice of giving the soul the silence it requires to do its work. Setting aside 20 minutes, protecting them with the same seriousness you would protect any other genuine necessity, is not a withdrawal from the world. It is the practice that makes genuine engagement with the world possible, because the person who has no silence has no access to the depth from which genuine engagement comes. Here is what I ask of you. Today, not the sacred hour, something simpler and more demanding, 20 minutes. Today, without your phone, without music, without any input from the external world, sit with whatever arises, the discomfort, the thoughts, the feelings that have been waiting behind the noise, the images that begin to surface when the stimulation ceases. Do not reach for relief. Do not reach for your phone the moment the discomfort arrives. Simply be present to what is there for 20 minutes, then tomorrow, and the day after. Not as a discipline, as a relationship. The daily return to the one conversation that can tell you what no external source of information can tell you. The conversation between the surface life you are living and the depths of the soul that are living it. Subscribe to this community, not for more content to fill your silence, but for the companionship of others who are learning the same difficult and essential art of being quiet long enough to hear what has always been trying to be heard. The soul is not silent. You have simply been too loud to hear it.